Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started with class in the next couple of minutes. There is Raul and Elena at the very back. Bring that baby up here. So glad to see you guys. Things are a little thing. AT has mentioned this several times. She's been working with us for several years. It's been a long time now. But I think one of the things that surprised her is some of the conversations and some of the things that happen inside the church office that you wouldn't expect to happen inside a church office or maybe anywhere near it. We have a great relationship among our staff, and we get together and do some different things. One of the things that we do most mornings is that Lance will get out the paper and he'll read the birthdays of people and famous people, and we have to guess like whose birthday is it or how old that person is. And Angie is like the winner every single time. One of the things that we do there, we have a different type of currency that we use. A lot of people like to trade in dollar bills, maybe yen, Deutschmark, I don't know, Bitcoin. But around our office, our currency is Nippa Hut burritos. And so every once in a while we'll have a wager or ask for a favor and say, hey, if you do this for me, I'll get you Nippa Hut next time. Amazing burritos. But a really weird bet came down the pipe just a couple of days ago when Lance was going to be speaking. He said if I would stand up in front of you and just completely disparage him and just kind of make fun of him and his sermon, after it was all over, then he would give me 3 burritos. And that is like the highest amount that can be offered. And I was really, really tempted. And I had to say something like on camera, well, that was cute, Lance, but here's what I really think about John chapter 4. However, the problem was I couldn't explain why I made that statement. And as much as I wanted those 3 burritos, I much more appreciate having a minister friend like I do, that we can come together and learn from each other and laugh and have a good time. And then for me to sit back on a Sunday morning and listen to him share something about John 4 that is pretty amazing. And I am certainly thankful for him. So I don't get the 3 burritos from him this morning, but I'm thankful for him filling in and giving me a Sunday where I can kind of sit and listen and worship and not think about what I'm doing or what's going on. Okay, so let's go to Acts chapter 10. Oh wow, I was misreading this clock. Wow. I have no idea. It is 10:20. Oh, okay. I'm a little better than I thought. Okay. Acts chapter 10, I'm going to be reading some, and then we're going to be talking about it. There's some interesting things that I think, hopefully, that we can glean from this. And when we get through it, you're definitely going to say, well, I've definitely heard this one before. So, and hopefully that's the point. Okay. Acts chapter 10, starting in verse 1. At Caesarea, there was a man named Cornelius, a centurion who was known as the Italian regiment. He and all his family were devout and God-fearing. He gave generously to those in need and prayed to God regularly. One day at about 3 in the afternoon, he had a vision. He distinctly saw an angel of God who came to him and said, Cornelius. Cornelius stared at him in fear. What is it, Lord? He asked. The angel answered, your prayers and gifts to the poor have come up as a memorial offering before God. Now send men to Joppa to bring back a man named Simon, who is called Peter. He is staying with Simon the tanner, whose house is by the sea. When the angel who spoke to him had gone, Cornelius called 2 of his servants and a devout soldier who was one of his attendants. He had told them everything that had happened, and then he sent them off to Joppa. Okay, so let's stop for just a minute. What's going on here? What's taking place? What jumps out of you in this text?
Simon named Peter.
Okay, Simon named Peter, so he's going to end up going to visit our good friend Peter, and he's going to join in on that story in just a little bit. So he's going to be sent, or he's going to send along people to go catch up with Peter. Okay? What else is going on? He's a Gentile. He's Italian. He's works for the Roman government, right? And so there's a couple things I want us to see from this. One, I think a really big thing I want us to see is that God is working. Okay, and please don't forget, I know we are in anxious times. I know it's difficult. I want to remind you that throughout the history of this world, there have been quite a few really anxious and difficult times. I don't want to try to compare ours to others, but I will say at this time in the first century, it was really, really tough. Okay? Race was a huge issue. Gender was a huge issue. Politics were a huge issue. Crime was a huge issue. Oppression, servitude, they were huge issues. We're talking about really difficult times. This is times when the church was struggling with persecution. And in just a few years, we're going to have Nero who's going to pop up on the scene. But right now already, Christians are still known as a sect. They're known as some really weird people. They're getting a bad rap, and they're starting to get a little bit of persecution already. All right? In fact, Paul, who's going to jump into the picture, is going to be one of those ones who is creating some of that persecution. So it's really difficult times, and God is working in those difficult times. Okay, so that's one thing I really want us to get out of this whole passage. I want you to walk away knowing God is working in difficult times. The second thing is, as Kenneth pointed out, God is going to go to a God-fearing Italian who works for Rome and is a soldier for them, a centurion. And I just think it's interesting that God is listening to the prayers of a righteous man who's not a Jew. And is going to use him in a powerful way. And we could roll back to the sermon this morning when God uses this woman who's been divorced 5 times, and she's now living with a man who is not her husband. And Jesus had to go to visit to her. And ultimately, she is going to lead her entire village to come to know Jesus in a more real way. They said, we no longer believe because of you, but we now believe because of him. But you're the one who brought him to us. And God is using a guy by the name of Cornelius, in which his gospel is going to end up expanding far beyond all of that. Anything else we want to touch on before we keep reading?
He knows of God.
Okay, he knows of God. Okay, he fears the Lord. And this is what's really special too, right? What is he going to do? God sends an angel and says, I want you to send for Peter. A guy named Simon Peter, right? And he even says where he's staying. Go get him. And what does he do? He sends his best man to go get him. There's no question. He doesn't say, well, what do you want him for? He doesn't say, well, Jews and Gentiles don't play well together. God, you probably should know that. Instead, he just obeys what God says. Worship is what? Obedience. Worship is this, but worship is also on your knees, obeying God. And I think that's why I think our worship can be greater outside of this building than it is inside. It's easy to come and worship around other people, who know the Lord, and we can get excited and we can praise Him, but worship can be really, really deep and profound when you're in a workplace and it's a difficult environment, and obedience to God is your form of worship. Okay, so let's pick up. Verse 9. About noon the following day, as they were on their journey and approaching the city, Peter went up on the roof to pray. He became hungry and wanted something to eat. And I just have to stop here and say, this has happened to you, right? Have you ever been praying, and like in the middle of the prayer, your stomach starts to rumble, and now it's like his mind is going off to food. So he became hungry and he wanted something to eat. And while the meal was being prepared, he fell into a trance. I don't know if he's really, really hungry, he's deep in meditation, or this is brought on by the Spirit of the Lord. But then he sees heaven open up, and something like a large sheet being let down to earth by its four corners. It contained all kinds of four-footed animals, as well as reptiles of the earth and birds of the air. Then a voice told him, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." "Surely not, Lord," Peter replied. "I've never eaten anything impure or unclean." The voice spoke to him a second time, "Do not call anything impure that God has made clean." This happened what? 3 times. If Paul ever decided to go, play, on the church softball league, what number would he have on the back of his jersey? It's got to be number 3. 3 times he's denied Jesus. 3 times Jesus asked him if he loved him. 3 times he's going to have this vision. And, well, there's going to be another 3, but I don't want to give that one away just yet. So 3 times this happened, and then the sheep was taken back up to heaven. Okay, why is this a big deal? We've all dreamed about food. I don't know that I've dreamed of a lizard on a sheet coming down from heaven and saying, "Kill and eat." I haven't had that one. But he's had this dream now. Why is this such a big deal?
Well, it's correlation to with people.
Okay.
At that time, certain people were considered unclean.
Okay.
And God is saying they are not unclean.
Well, you've cheated. You've looked ahead. You know where we're going. But we're not talking about people yet. I'm not going to say anything about pigs or snakes or, any of you who would, remind me of such a thing. But he's still just looking at animals, right? Why is this a big deal that there's these animals on the sheet? And God says, "I want you to kill and eat these animals."
He's a Jew. There's certain things they don't eat.
He's a Jew. There's a lot of things that they don't eat. Including the birds, and some of the birds, and certainly reptiles, and a lot of the four-footed animals. In the Old Testament, there were a lot of animals that were considered unclean. And so these animals are seen, and Peter looks at them and he says, "I ain't touching those. I wouldn't do that. I would never do that."
I'm not that hungry.
Yeah, I'm not that hungry. Can you imagine how this would have changed society, how this would have changed Jews when, for the first time they could sit down and eat a bacon cheeseburger? This is they had seen this. They had seen other people partake in that kind of food that they had abstained from. And I'm not trying to be goofy or silly or anything, but this really was a big sacrifice. To think that, they could walk out and they could smell pork being cooked, that they could smell bacon being fried by their neighbors. But as Jews, they're "I'm not allowed to do that." He was offended when God says, "Kill and eat." He goes, "Not me, Lord. I wouldn't do that." Right? And God says 3 different times he has this, and God says, he says, "Don't call what I have made. Don't call anything impure that God has made clean." And I don't think he's quite made that connection yet. I think he's still talking about the menu, the diet, what I'm eating. That's, I think, still on his mind. At least if I'm him, that's what I'm thinking. But now listen to this, verse 17. This is just awesome. While Peter was wondering about the meaning of the vision, The men sent by Cornelius found out where Simon's house was and stopped at the gate. They called out asking if Simon Peter, who was known as Peter, was staying there. Okay, again we have to stop. This is miraculous. This is miraculous. Okay? They did not punch in their GPS to say, I'm going to show up around a mealtime at Peter's house. This is my route. Like, they had to travel there, and in traveling there, they would have had to stop and ask so they could find out, oh, is this, where the tanner lives? Is this where Simon is staying? While Peter was still thinking about the vision, the Spirit said to him, Simon, 3 men are looking for you. I have to have that number 3 in there. So get up and go downstairs. Do not hesitate to go with them, for I have sent them. So he's in the middle of this trance. He's had this dream, this vision 3 times over. The sheet lowers. There's animals in there. There's birds. There's reptiles. And God says, I want you to kill and eat. He argues. God says, don't call anything that I've made unclean. And then God basically wakes him up from his dream. He says, hey, wake up. Downstairs there are some guys. Don't be afraid of them. I sent them. I want you to go with them. Peter went down and said to the men, I'm the one you're looking for. Why have you come? The men replied, we have come from Cornelius the centurion. He is a righteous and God-fearing man who is respected by all the Jewish people. A holy angel told him to have you come to his house so that he could hear what you have to say. Does Paul even have any idea about what he's going to say? I'm sorry, Paul. Has Peter had any idea about what he's going to say? They show up and they said, hey, he had a vision that you're supposed to come to his house. So we came to where you were staying to get you to go because he wants to hear what you're going to say. And I wonder if Peter's thinking, what am I supposed to say? Like I'm hungry. I'm about to eat. I had this weird vision. And now you guys show up. I can't make sense of this. I don't know what's going on.
Doug,
Yes.
if you want another 3, if you'll notice, Cornelius had his vision about the 9th hour.
Yeah.
Peter had his about the 6th.
Okay.
Actually, Peter has his vision first.
Yes.
And then Cornelius, and then it's all going to come together at the end.
Yeah. It's interesting how the way that God actually plans this out. Cornelius gets the vision. He sends his people on, and it's right before they show up that Peter gets a vision. Are we going crazy? Peter has a vision, and that's right at the time that Cornelius is showing up. You'll be switched to this one?
We think it's electrical interference. We're playing with the lights in the back.
Uh-huh.
It's clearing up and getting worse.
Well, that explains the light show at the back. None of y'all can see this, but I was watching the foyer lights going on and off. I'm like, is the youth having some like techno dance show off going on, show off down here? Like I just kept seeing lights go on and off. It's better now. So, and it's loud enough that I think I woke everybody up. So here we go again. Okay, so what's going to happen next? I'm going to summarize the next few verses. Peter's going to invite the people in, then they're going to go to Cornelius' house. Cornelius is going to bow, and Peter's going to say, get up. And then he says, God's shown me Gentiles aren't unclean. Why did you send for me? That's just like opening line. He says, get up. He says, don't bow down. He says, by the way, I just had this dream that Gentiles aren't unclean. And then why did you send for me? So listen as he picks up. We're going to now jump to verse 30. Cornelius answered, 4 days ago I was in my house praying at this hour. At 3 in the afternoon, suddenly a man in shining clothes stood before me and said, Cornelius, God has heard your prayer and remembered your gifts to the poor. Send it. Wait, we've already read this, haven't we? Didn't we read this already before? Cornelius. We've read this, haven't we?
Well,
We're-
he is repeating what happened so Peter can hear.
I know, but like we know who wrote Acts. Anybody tell me who wrote Acts? Luke wrote Acts. Like Luke the doctor, Luke the meticulous author, Luke the one who goes out and he visits with people, he questions them. Like he's like a really good writer. His Greek is amazing. His thought process, the way he lines it out is amazing. In fact, of all the writers in the New Testament, Luke writes more than anybody else. Because you add Luke and Acts, and they are so lengthy, they're more than all of Paul's writings combined. But it seems like he got a little confused, because he's already told us this story before, but now he's having him retell the story that's already been told once. But you know what? I'll tell you what, I'll just keep reading. Send to Joppa for Simon, who is Peter. He is a guest in the house of Simon the tanner, who lives by the sea. So I sent for you immediately, and it was good of you to come. Now we are all here in the presence of God to listen to everything the Lord has commanded you to tell us. So this happens, and Luke tells that this happens. Then Peter shows up, and now we have Luke is going to again now tell Cornelius's account of what happens. So now we have two different times that we have this story of what takes place. He's hanging out in his house. He has a vision. He sends for Peter. Peter is going to now come to his house. Now, it's Peter's turn. And because of for sake of time, and because we know that Peter loves to speak, we're going to have to summarize the next 15 verses. Paul is going to preach. The Holy Spirit's going to come down, and then people are going to be baptized. That's the end of chapter 10. And I want to pick up in chapter 11, verse 1 through 10. And I'm going to summarize that as well. Peter is going to go to Jerusalem. He shows up into Jerusalem, and the Jews are immediately going to begin criticizing him. And they're going to say, hey, what are you doing eating with Gentiles? Peter is going to recount the vision that he has had. Okay, so we're going to hear this story again. And now I want to pick up in verse 11 of chapter 11 of Acts. It says, right then, 3 men who'd been sent to me from Caesarea stopped in the house where I was staying. The Spirit told me to have no hesitation about going with them. These 6 brothers also went with me, and we entered into the man's house. He told us how he had seen an angel appear to him in the house and say to him, send to Joppa for Simon. What is Luke doing? We've heard this before. This is now the 3rd time in 2 chapters we're now hearing this story. 3 no wonder Luke has the most writing in the New Testament. He can't get past the broken record. It's like he gets past the story and somebody bumps the needle and it scoots back again. And now for the 3rd time we're hearing this story. Well, there's a centurion, who's hanging out in his house, and he has this, well, I might as well go ahead and read it. He told us how he had seen an angel appear in the house and say, send to Joppa for Simon, who is called Peter. He will bring you a message through which you and all your household will be saved. Is Luke out of his mind? Does Luke have early onset dementia? How could he have forgotten that he has told this story twice already?
He hadn't forgotten, because even today, you have someone have this dream and tell someone else this dream and go to whatnot. They go to somebody else. They repeat it again. So
yeah, but as a writer, wouldn't it do him well to just say, go back and look at a few verses? Well, he didn't have any verses, and he says, he could have just said the dream. But he doesn't. Lynn.
I got a question. First, I got to disagree with you, then I got a question.
Go.
I think Peter would have number 1 on his back, because that's what he always thought he was. He never was.
For those of you who are online, Lynn just said, I think Peter should have had number 1 on his back because that's what he thought he was.
Okay.
So that's great.
But in defense of that, what I'm saying is, maybe Luke is considering who is going to do this for the Lord. No one was any more hard-headed and confident also than Peter. Without the vision, would he even accepted those 3 men? So I think because of the importance of, just personal prejudice that exists among the Jews, at this time in Acts, this is when it's kind of turning the page. And they're starting to take the word to the Jews who were brave enough to be converted. They're starting to take it to the Gentiles. And I think there's a lot of it. So I think all the tension and everything is so important that he just kept repeating this. And I think it had to do with who was God using. I think Peter was a big part of that. And I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into it. Maybe if it's like, hey, he's so hard-headed, but he's such a leader, so if I don't make a point about how he could accept it, maybe they could.
Hey, if you're misreading it, then I am too. And I think this is why I think Luke does what he does. Okay? And I cannot overstate how big of a deal this is. Okay? And, Jesus referenced this in John 4 with the woman at the well. He's like, there's going to be a time where it's not going to be about where you worship. Right? And now we're still about 4 decades away from that. It's not until 70 that we have the destruction of Jerusalem and, of course, the temple. But the shift starts right here. The shift starts here. And again, it is just incredible. And I know there is some racial animosity and divisions that have, I don't want to say cropped up because, they've been around forever. But it seems like, at least for me, growing up early, I didn't see the racial tensions like I'm seeing today now, and it just is completely heartbreaking. But with that being said, and I don't want to offend anybody in here, but some of the racial tensions that we have now in America pale in comparison to some of the racial tensions that they had back then. You talk about the difference between Jews and Gentiles, and Jews and Romans, or Romans and anybody else. It was really a big deal. Where you could go worship depended upon your race. Okay, this is really big, and all of a sudden, I just want to scream boom, like this is about to completely change everything that the Jews had believed in for thousands of years. Remember, you go all the way back to Abraham when God says, the world and the people in it are living crazy. I want to have a group of people who will follow me, who will come to know me, and who will show the world who I am. And he selected Abraham. He says, I'm going to let you have a family. You have done. You don't have a child, but someday you're going to have a child. You're going to have enough children that will outnumber the sands of the seashore. And the whole world is going to be blessed through that seed. And it gets really, he says, okay, you are going to be those people. And what happens? Not to be mean, but the Jews failed. They did not show God like God wanted to be shown. He had these laws that says here, this is going to give you an idea of how I want you to live. These are going to be the guidelines. I want you to put me first. I want you to honor me. I want you to set aside a day in which I am honored that whole day. And instead, they took that day and they twisted it. And they said, you're lying down in a ditch, bleeding, and I'm not going to help you because God says that I shouldn't help you. And the Jews had failed to show God to the rest of the world. And so what God is going to do is God is going to send His Son, Jesus. And make no mistake about this, God did not send Jesus so he could learn how people live and act and think. Okay, that's not it. Okay, that is poor theology to think that God's up there saying, I have no idea what people down there are going through. He sent Jesus so the people down here could learn about how God thinks and how he loves and how he sacrifices and how he seeks out people. And so he does this, and at that time it was only for the Jews, but it was being expanded, and now all of a sudden everything was going to change. Practically, logistically, it was going to change. Doors were going to be opened up, and don't think it happened overnight. I mean, there are things that we do here that I tell you what, if we decided that, hey, you know what, we're going to stop worshiping at 9 a.m., we're going to start worshiping at 9 p.m. Or what if we said we're going to start having worship at 2? What if we said we're going to start worshiping on, we're going to have our worship service on Saturday night? Can you imagine what would happen here? How people would get upset about that? I changed the angle of the pew, and I get people saying, well, that's not right. I need to have that changed back. Right? I mean, we do those things. What if we said, hey, we're going to stop doing communion? That's not valid anymore. Now, according to the New Testament, it is. But that's when you talk about the Old Testament, and the Old Testament says we have these sacrifices and we have these laws, and all of a sudden Jesus comes in and says, I'm the sacrifice, you don't need it anymore. And all the Jews that weren't a part of this, who couldn't come in, now once you open the doors, I want you to let them in. Among all the racial tension that was going on, all of a sudden it says, open up the doors, invite them in, stop trying to push them out. And how many people said, I've been in this church for 60 years and we've never had a Gentile walk in, and we will never have one walk in? This is the way that we've always done it. You know what? If we remove this piece right here, this is this doing remembrance of me, can you imagine how upset people would get? You know, there's a story years and years ago about a church who they had made one of these, and it was beautifully stained, and someone was concerned about getting scratched up, and so they put a little white cloth across it. And somehow that kind of picked up, and across several different churches they started putting on those white cloths. In fact, they had some older ladies, they were in charge of the cloth on there, and they would take it home and they'd wash it and they'd put it back on there. And finally, after about 30 years, somebody says, man, we have this beautiful wooden table. Why are we covering it up with this old cloth, that's, people hadn't been taking care of as much as they go to take it off, and all of a sudden people go, what happened to the white cloth? My grandmother I watched her carry it home, and she would scrub on it with a little scrub board, and that's really important. I mean, we're talking about huge, huge, huge change. And I think this is exactly why Luke took the opportunity to write the 3 different times in which this happened. Because what he's saying is this. This is not about Cornelius. This is not about Peter. This is not about what you like in your church. This is not about what you've done for the last 50 years. This is God himself acting and working in this world. That's what it's about. He says, I'm making a big change, and I want you to join in on what's going on. And so there's 3 things that I want us to get from Acts chapter 10 and 11. I know I didn't get to preach, and so I still have to have my 3 points in my class. By the way, Rusty, I did catch you looking at your watch when I said my 3 points. So I know you weren't the only one, but I'm watching too. I've got 9 minutes and 5 seconds. The first thing we need, and I've already pointed this out, is we need to recognize that God is working. Right now, I want you to know that God is working in America, in New Mexico, in Hobbs. He is working in our neighborhoods, in our lives. He's even working in our governments and our schools. God is working. Forgetting that God is in control leads to disorientation and discouragement. Believers become overwhelmed because they begin thinking that God doesn't know, doesn't care, or is unable to do anything about it. When we forget that God is working, it can get really, really scary. So I want you to know this. And I know some of you are thinking, oh, really? Is he working? Knock, knock. Here we have COVID part 2, right? God is working.
Yes.
Our good friend Vaughn couldn't get into the hospital here because it's full of people who are really sick. And God is working.
Yes. Yes, he is.
And you walk outside, and within 5 minutes, you can start an argument with somebody based on a shot that they've had or a mask that they're wearing. And God is working.
Yes, he is.
School systems. We've got teachers who are working hard. We have administrators working hard. We have kids. Some of them are actually showing up to learn. Some of them are bouncing off the walls crazy. Okay? And God is working.
Yes.
People are dying every day and God is working. Absolutely. And so here's what I want to suggest. I believe that we need to seek, question, and observe how he is working. I think we need to seek, question, and observe how he is working. Is my phone right there? Will you bring that to me? I apologize. I just noticed that my print off here for some reason cut off half of my notes. And that doesn't mean that you get out half as early as you would. Thankfully, I have them right here, and we'll continue. Okay, sorry about that. Before we can proclaim what God is saying, we need to actually stop and listen for his voice. Before we proclaim what he's saying, we have to be willing to stop and listen. One of the critical practices of the church is how we pay attention to what God is already doing ahead of us. And now I'm going to step on some toes just a little bit. At least it was for me. What if God is up to something bigger than making our lives more comfortable, our jobs more productive, and our retirement more enjoyable? What if God is not concerned about fixing our churches or making them more attractive and more relevant? What if God isn't working to make our schools more effective, our government more efficient, or our economy more profitable? What if God is less concerned about our country than he is about his church? Is it possible that God is working right now and he's calling us to find out what he's doing and to join him? And so the third thing is this: we need to join in on what he's doing. This just breaks my heart. It's not a true statistic, but somebody had once suggested, if the Holy Spirit disappeared, at least 90% of what we're doing would proceed on without any changes. What if that's true? What if the Holy Spirit leaves and we say, you know what, let's just keep doing the things that we should be doing? God engages a world that has been turned upside down, and we need our lenses to be flipped, or we miss what God is doing, and thereby we lose opportunities to participate in turning it right side up. That's what we're called to do. I wish I had time. I'll share this real quick. He says, we are called to improvise. Improvising simply means that we take what God has given us, we couple it with the knowledge of what God is doing, and we just go out and do it. you've seen those improv shows, or Whose Line Is It Anyway? These guys, obviously, and ladies, are super talented. They're witty, they're funny, and all of a sudden they get a topic and they have to start going with it. Right? And they have to start, and then they have to roll with it. I think as a church, that's what we need to be willing to do. Is we need to be saying, okay, this is the gifts that God has given us. This is what God has gifted this church with. Okay, and now we need to listen. We need to look and see what's God doing right now. Okay, so step back for just a second. What might God be doing with this time, in this time of volatility? Okay, this is a serious question, and I'm going to milk the last 3 minutes that I have. I want you to think about this. What do you think God can be doing right now with chaos and sickness and COVID? What could God be accomplishing through this right now?
Bringing us to our knees.
Okay, He could be bringing us to our knees. You think that's a fair response? You think maybe as a culture we become really comfortable and bending knees is something that we don't do? What if that's what God's plan is? Okay, so if God's plan is, and I don't know for sure, I'm not going to speak for God, but I'm going to say if this could be one of the things. If God is saying, listen, we become too comfortable in our lives and we care too much about our health and how long we're going to live and how happy we're going to be and how comfortable we're going to be, that I'm going to allow them to go through this time of discomfort and knees will bend. If that's what God is doing, what should the church do? We should be bending our knees and recognizing that that's what God is doing. Okay, another thing, what else could God be doing through what's going on right now in our society and in our neighborhoods? Opportunities of servitude. Okay? We've really come to enjoy our time off. You know, Sunday afternoons are pretty sacred in the Crum household. You know, I get up kind of early on Sunday morning. It kind of takes a lot of energy. When Sunday afternoon comes around, man, I'm really excited about that. What if God is saying, hey, you know what? This is not about feeling comfortable. It's not about vacations. It's not about days off. It's not about holidays. It's not about retirement. That I want you to be people who are constantly working and worshiping for the Lord. What else could God be saying through what's going on right now? Lynn?
Maybe He's doing the same thing He's doing with Peter and trying to raise him up to another level.
Okay.
Totally trusting.
Yeah.
Get out of his traditions and customs and all the things that gives us that comfort. I think the whole design of God's plan is to raise us up. We're the ones down low, not Jesus.
Yeah.
So maybe He's using this time to say, hey, you need me to lift you up.
Yeah. Hey.
You look different to everybody.
We've really, as a society, we've come to rely on things going our way, of trusting in certain things. We've trusted in the dollar, and we've trusted in work, and we've trusted in our jobs, and look what happened. All of a sudden, we have people who are out of work, who are financially in a difficult position. We have people who were cruising through life with everything going just the way it always went to go, and all of a sudden, like, hey, you're not going into work for the next 6 weeks or 9 months or whatever. You're not going to be around people for a while. And all of a sudden, the thing you said, well, I'm resting, trusting on this nest egg that I've been saving up. And all of a sudden, it's like, whoa. And if that's what God's doing, if God's saying, I want you to rely on me, not on things or money or retirement, what should the church do? We should rely on Him. I don't know about you, but this makes me really, really, really excited. Because all of a sudden, it changes enough to say that this is not something like, oh, this is terrible, the world is ending. This is, I believe that God is doing something. What is He doing? And how can I be a part of that? When things aren't going right, listen, I mean, there's amazing opportunities. And I think God is working. Okay, so we're out of time, but I want to ask you, Rusty's going to have a comment, and then I have homework for you. Rusty.
The risk of wasting your last 30 seconds
Yes.
Could it just be that God is wanting us to be aware of Him
Absolutely.
and what He has done, the sacrifice that He made?
Yes.
Could we just be more aware every day, everything we're doing, at every hour? Could that be something that He's trying to instill back into His people?
One of the books I'm reading that I've gotten some of this material comes from is basically saying that right there, that we have, as a world, we are buying into this idea that we can live life without God and it's okay. Like we don't need God anymore. Like that's the way society has shifted in all aspects of our life. Like we don't need God anymore. Years and years and years ago, when people had issues, they would spend time in prayer and in meditation. They were in touch with the world that God has created. We now live in concrete boxes and we fly down the roads in metal cars and we surround ourselves with things that we have made to the point that we've forgotten that God is the one who created this world from the beginning. And we run the risk of believing the lie that life can be lived without God. And people are buying into that and have been for the last 100 years or so till we gotten to the point where now we're like, we don't even believe He existed. We've discovered through science that He doesn't. And so what I want you to do is this. I want you, I'm not encouraging you to watch the news, because usually what I say is turn off the news. But if you're watching the news or you hear this, I want you to ask the question, how could God be working through this situation? One. Okay, and what can I do to join Him in that? And if you find yourself in a hospital visiting or being a patient there, if you find yourself in a difficult time, I just want you to ask the question, what could God be doing through this? And don't forget, this is what Acts is all about. God is working in our world today, even in bad times. So let's close out in prayer. Thank you for allowing me to go a little bit long. Father God, I thank you again for giving us the opportunity to read the story of Cornelius, who in the minds of so many people was unworthy. He wasn't the right one. He wasn't the right race. He wasn't the one who should have been a part of this. And yet you wove him into this story of sharing the gospel that would include him. It would include his family. It would include the people around him. And it would include all of us. Without that, this is not our story. But our story, your story and ours comes together when you invite us into relationship. And so God, as you have allowed this world to go through some hardship and heartache and some confusion and hurt and anger and the volatility that we're facing right now, Lord, that is not your absence. That is a reminder of your call and your working in this life. And so, God, as we experience good things and bad things, as we read of good news and bad news, may we ask the question, God, what are you doing? And as an individual, as a family, and as a church, I pray that we will ask the question, and what can we do to be a part of that? Thank you for inviting us to be a part of that, Lord. I just pray that you be with us as we go out and seek to do your will and worship you in all ways. It's in your Son's name that I pray. Amen. All right. Thank you all for being here. You are dismissed.
It means he's going to be the one that.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Great class.
Good job, Bubba.
Has this week been better than last week?
I picked up perks and
Okay.
not so bad though. I could broke my heart, but she's right. You got to be careful what you ask for. always said when I was retired, I do absolutely nothing. God showed me that once in for 2 months when I couldn't do it. Now I'm enjoying it. Been home about 3 weeks. Getting some stuff done around the house. I'm enjoying that clean porch so much. Man and his brother, they're keeping my yard and water and everything. They're so good. Doing good. I still sit on the porch, not in the heat of the day. I don't have to go out in sunlight. My dog does. I don't have to go out. I got to help visit with the car show.
Okay, it was here in town.
Yeah, out at the casino actually.
Yeah.
Because the chamber canceled their part of it, so we had to change where we had it. But their part was up on right, but I volunteered. I mean, especially I've worked so much in the city hot.
Did y'all have shade?
Yeah, we were in a trailer that had I've been shaved with the lumber pretty good. But my car right now has no emergency. There ain't no parts. The blender doesn't work, so if you turn any climate on, everything else is cool. Sitting right under the driver, it blows extremely hot air. So we don't run with the climate on. We just open the windows.